On July the 9th of 2024, the family of BBC racing commentator John Hunt was brutally murdered in a targeted attack carried out by 26-year-old Kyle Clifford. He broke into the Hunt's home in Bushey, Hertfordshire, and tied up 61-year-old Carol Hunt as well as her daughters Louise and Hannah, aged 25 and 28 respectively. At around 6:30 p.m, neighbours heard piercing screams coming from the suburban home, which they initially misidentified as those of a distressed child. As the commotion continued, the police were called. Silence soon followed after Clifford had used a crossbow and possibly other weapons to inflict fatal injuries on the three women. He was then captured on surveillance cameras calmly walking away with what appeared to be the crossbow tucked under his arm and hidden under a white sheet. First responders found Carol with a crossbow bolt in her chest in the home's hallway. She and her daughters weren't tied up when they were discovered, but ligature marks were present around their faces and wrists, in addition to signs of injuries to their knees. The victims were still clinging to life, but in spite of the efforts of paramedics, they passed away at the scene. A manhunt was launched for Clifford, a former soldier who'd served in the Queen's Dragoon Guards for a short time before dropping out. The public were warned that he was to be considered armed and extremely dangerous. He was found within 24 hours hiding among headstones in a North London cemetery. The man was in critical condition from crossbow-related injuries. Clifford had been in a relationship with Louise and they recently went through what was described as a turbulent breakup. Days before she was murdered, Louise had posted, "I admire women who leave. It takes a lot of strength to break a tie. It takes a lot of self-love to choose yourself." As of the latest updates, Clifford was still recovering in a hospital. He'd yet to be formally charged with the triple murder, and the authorities were still investigating the incident. Number 6. Tonia Crabtree and Craig Morse. In the early hours of April the 3rd of 2020, English couple Tonia Crabtree and Craig Morse were having a heated argument at the home they shared in Derbyshire. Both had been drinking heavily, and the fight escalated to physical violence. Crabtree punched and slapped 33-year-old Morse, who struck back, giving her a black eye. As the brawl moved to the kitchen, Crabtree grabbed a 3-inch knife, reportedly intending to self-harm, and Morse tried to wrestle it out of her hands. In the ensuing struggle, the woman plunged the blade into her boyfriend's chest, piercing his heart. Morse staggered out of the kitchen and into the main bedroom where Crabtree's brother Daniel and his partner were sleeping. Daniel reported that Morse was repeatedly screaming, "She's stabbed me!" The father of four then struggled back to his girlfriend and hugged her before he collapsed in the hallway. Morse told Crabtree, "I love you." Those would become his last words, as he subsequently bled to death from his knife wound. Crabtree was initially charged with murder but ultimately convicted of manslaughter due to insufficient evidence. She was jailed for 4 years and 9 months. During sentencing, Morse's father told her, "Tonia, you broke God's first commandment, and you will have to face him one day. God shall forgive you, but I never will." Number 5. Nikita Kirby and Scott Wallace. 31-year-old Australian woman Nikita Kirby was arrested in late May of 2024 for fatally stabbing her on-again, off-again boyfriend, 37-year-old Scott Wallace. The incident took place at Kirby's apartment on Murrabin Avenue in Sydney. Wallace was pronounced dead at the scene while Kirby was arrested near her sister's home in Matraville. Kirby's mother, Ruth, told the media that her daughter had acted in self-defense following the roller coaster of domestic violence that her relationship with Wallace had become. Ruth claimed that Wallace, who allegedly abused drugs and alcohol frequently, had bashed her daughter in the past, leaving her covered in bruises. Kirby took out a protection order against Wallace in 2021, and it expired in October of 2023. The man had reportedly gone to her apartment against her wishes, resulting in an altercation and the fatal knifing. Kirby was charged with murder but didn't make an immediate court appearance, and the case was adjourned until August of 2024. Number 4. Olubunmi and Taiwo Abodunde. Leading up to November of 2023, Olubunmi Abodunde had been repeatedly investigated by police in Suffolk, England, for incidents of domestic violence perpetrated against his wife, Taiwo. The man would become jealous and accuse her of having affairs, resulting in rows that sometimes turned physical. On November the 27th of 2023, law enforcement was called to the couple's home and found 41-year-old Taiwo with a split lip. Olubunmi was arrested and released later in the day on the condition that he stayed away from the marital home. After working a night shift at Tesco, the man returned to the residence at around 9 a.m. the following day. He reportedly wanted to recover his cell phone but knew that Taiwo, a healthcare assistant, would be at the home after she too had worked overnight. At around 9:20 a.m., officers went to the address to take a statement from Taiwo regarding the previous night's incident. Law enforcement heard dozens of thuds and loud noises coming from inside, but reportedly had to wait for nearly half an hour until their superiors gave them permission to enter the premises. By the time that they were given the green light, it was too late. Officers found Taiwo with her skull smashed in. Olubunmi had stomped and strangled the mother of his 3 children, in addition to repeatedly striking her with a skateboard. Shattered skull fragments were found at the scene, and it was determined that Taiwo had succumbed to catastrophic brain injuries. Olubunmi, a Nigerian immigrant who had arrived in the UK with his family in 2022, was taken to a local hospital as he appeared to be in the grips of a mental health episode. He later told the police that his wife had beaten him multiple times in the past and that during the fatal altercation, she charged him with a knife. The latter claim appeared to be unsubstantiated. Olubunmi eventually admitted to killing Taiwo, and in the spring of 2024, he was jailed for life with a minimum of 17 years behind bars. Number 3. Brandon and Brittnay Paonessa. A woman from Lee County, Alabama, was arrested for murder in June of 2019 following an incident in which she'd gunned down her husband months after giving birth to their 3rd child. Brittnay and Brandon Paonessa had reportedly been violent towards each other at various times in their 6-year marriage. Brandon was arrested in 2018 for punching his wife in the stomach after she'd reportedly looked through his phone. The 3rd-degree domestic violence charge was eventually dismissed at Brittnay's request. Brandon was in the US Army throughout the couple's marriage and had done 2 tours in Afghanistan. By the summer of 2019, the infantryman was based at Fort Benning on the Georgia-Alabama border. In June, he sought an emergency protection from abuse order against Brittnay, alleging that she was very mentally ill, very unstable, and that she refused to get professional help. 26-year-old Brandon accused his wife of threatening his job and of stalking him, his family, and friends. He noted a particularly harrowing incident in which Brittnay had ran a truck into the house, narrowly missing their children. 3 days after filing for protection, Brandon would be dead on June the 13th under unclear circumstances. Brittnay fired a shotgun blast into his abdomen at their home in the 500 block of Lee Road in Phoenix City. Brandon was found unresponsive in the front yard and later pronounced dead. Brittnay's murder trial was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and according to a 2022 update, a judge had ordered her to undergo a mental health evaluation. It was suspected that her erratic behavior leading up to the murder was linked to postpartum depression. Today's topic was requested by Richard Cranium 9343 and Dezims Fergland Zend 0411. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Paul and Theresa Hanson. On the evening of December the 28th of 2022, 3 days after they'd hosted their adult children for Christmas celebrations, English couple Paul and Theresa Hanson were at their home in West Cowick, East Yorkshire. They began arguing after Theresa had challenged Paul for becoming increasingly inebriated. The 54-year-old's drinking had reportedly been the basis of past arguments between them. Paul verbally lashed out at his wife, insulting her and telling her to throw his dinner in the garbage. He continued berating her as Theresa was in the kitchen cutting onions. In what was described as a spontaneous act of violence, the woman stabbed her husband in the chest when he approached her from behind. The blade pierced Paul's heart and severed his aorta, causing him to suffer fatal blood loss. Theresa would later tell the authorities that she failed to realize her husband was hurt and that she continued cutting onions with the same knife. Theresa claimed she then heard their dog barking and went to Paul, at which point she saw that he was on the brink of death. The woman called the emergency services saying, "We had an argument. I was cooking tea. I don't know what I did." When paramedics arrived at the home, Theresa offered them £1,000 each to save her husband's life. Paul was declared dead at Hull's Royal Infirmary. In the stabbing's aftermath, Theresa was charged with murder but denied it and went to trial. During the legal proceedings that followed, the woman maintained that she'd never meant to injure her husband and claimed that she hadn't realized she was holding the blade when he came towards her. The prosecution disputed her argument, stating injuries like that simply don't happen, and arguing that Theresa, enraged by her husband's verbal assault, had intentionally stabbed him. It took a jury roughly 3 hours to find Theresa guilty. In the fall of 2023, the 54-year-old hairdresser was handed a life sentence with a minimum custodial term of 9 years. These couples prove that a house divided against itself cannot stand, and sometimes brides can be the main problem. Stick around after number 1 for our previous release, when the worst bridezillas go wrong. Number 1. Charles Calbert and Marcia Linsky. Paramedics and officers from the Allen County Sheriff's Office in Indiana were called to a home in the 10500 block of Lagoon Drive. On February the 3rd of 2024, the caller was 60-year-old Charles Calbert, and he met first responders when they arrived at the address. Inside, they found the lifeless body of 64-year-old Marcia Linsky, who had been fatally stabbed in the head and neck. The woman, a former prosecutor and magistrate in Allen County, had been dating Calbert for about a year. The man admitted to stabbing his girlfriend but claimed to have done so in self-defense, following an argument over chopping onions. Calbert told the police that Linsky berated him for not doing it properly before coming at him with a knife. Calbert also grabbed a blade and reacted by knifing the woman to death. Investigators noted several suspicious aspects regarding the scene and the man's behavior in the stabbing's aftermath. The kitchen was in disarray, seemingly confirming that a struggle had taken place, but the knives, the larger of which was covered in blood, were placed neatly next to the victim's body. There was an onion peel in the garbage, but no signs of chopped onions anywhere in the home. Calbert admitted that he'd waited for about an hour to alert the emergency services. Blood in the master bathroom indicated that he'd showered and cleaned himself up beforehand. He was also remarkably calm during the 911 call, telling the dispatcher in reference to Linsky, "She became very verbal with me and she's no longer with us." Calbert maintained that he'd merely defended himself, but he was arrested and charged with Linsky's murder. On July the 7th of 2013, only 8 days after their wedding, 22-year-old Jordan Graham murdered her husband, 25-year-old Cody Johnson, by pushing him off the edge of a cliff in Montana's Glacier National Park. The couple were hiking during their honeymoon when Graham allegedly told her husband she'd been having second thoughts about their marriage. Though she initially told police Johnson had gone for a joyride with friends and didn't know of his whereabouts, she eventually confessed to the crime but insisted it had been an accident. According to Graham, Johnson had grown hostile after the argument and had violently grabbed her arm, prompting her to push him away. She agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder, but subsequently attempted to retract her plea when the prosecution continued to push for a life sentence. The judge didn't allow Graham to change her plea, sentencing her to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole and 5 years probation upon her release. Number 10. Lewisham Bride. On August the 13th of 2022, an unidentified woman clad in a white dress walked into a McDonald's kitchen and stole 2 Big Macs in Lewisham, London. Baffled customers recorded the incident, which started when the angry bride began ranting and arguing with employees. After she was told there were no more hamburgers available at the moment, the woman jumped over the counter and grabbed 2 Big Macs, shoving them in her dress and down her bra as employees tried to stop her. One of the managers repeatedly asked her to leave, but she continued to yell at other staff members, demanding more food and attempting to grab 2 other burgers from the hot plate. The bride eventually walked out of the store with the stolen hamburgers before police could reach the scene. No arrests were made and the woman had yet to be identified as of the latest available updates. Number 9. Ashley Jordan. Arizona newlyweds Ashley Jordan and Eric Cordova were arrested on July the 29th of 2019 for assaulting several police officers only hours after their wedding ceremony had concluded. Both 30-year-old Jordan and 32-year-old Cordova were still wearing their wedding clothes at the time of the arrest. The couple had reportedly become belligerent while drinking at a bar and attacked an employee, at which point The police were called to the scene. When officers arrived, Jordan and Cordova refused to cooperate with them. Several wedding guests subsequently charged the policemen in an attempt to help the newlyweds evade capture. 2 other men were arrested along with the couple, 31-year-old Dustin Trout and 25-year-old Amos Puckett, who were charged with aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer, resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. Fortunately, the officers suffered only minor injuries in the scuffle. Number 8. Adrienne Seaman. On August the 28th of 2003, 19-year-old Adrienne Seaman spent the night in jail after having a drunken meltdown during her wedding reception at a restaurant in South Windsor, Connecticut. Seaman lost her temper after employees at the eatery allegedly closed the bar 45 minutes earlier than arranged and demanded guests leave the premises. The restaurant later claimed they only asked people to leave after some of the guests had jumped behind the bar and started pouring themselves drinks. Once out in the parking lot, Seaman began destroying vases and gifts and throwing pieces of wedding cake as she berated both restaurant employees and her own guests. Seaman was belligerent when police arrived and attempted to resist arrest. While in jail, she spat at a surveillance camera and attempted to throw her wedding ring away. Seaman ended up pleading guilty to creating a public disturbance as part of a deal with the prosecution. She was ordered to pay a $90 fine and received a recommendation to take anger management classes. Number 7. Vanessa Klein. 32-year-old Vanessa Klein was arrested on March the 27th of 2019 after it was discovered she'd embezzled over $93,000 from her job in order to pay for her wedding. Klein's misdeeds came to light after her boss, the owner of No Limits Construction, was informed that one of the company's accounts would be closed due to lack of payment. He immediately contacted police and an investigation was launched, leading to the discovery that Klein had made several unauthorized purchases with company funds. While working as the construction's business's bookkeeper, she reportedly purchased a wedding dress, perfume, plane tickets, and an ATV. The bride-to-be even hired a wedding planner for $25,000 and also paid for a $7,000 butt lift. Klein's arrest wasn't the first time a No Limits Construction employee had gotten into trouble for embezzling funds. Between 2016 and 2018, the previous bookkeeper had stolen over $150,000 before getting caught. Klein was charged with embezzlement, forgery, and putting false money into circulation. Number 6. Alexis Demetria Armstrong. Newlyweds Alexis Demetria Armstrong and Shavarius Jawan Moses were arrested in Abbeville, Alabama, after police discovered illicit substances in their car during a traffic stop on December the 15th of 2022. 26-year-old Armstrong and 28-year-old Moses were still in their wedding clothes as they drove from Alabama to Florida for their honeymoon. The couple was stopped for speeding, leading to the police's discovery of drugs in their vehicle. While Moses was charged with possession of a controlled substance and paraphernalia, Armstrong was accused of providing false information to law enforcement and carrying a weapon without the proper permit. The newlyweds spent the night in separate jail cells and were released after posting bond the following day. Number 5. Tammy Lee Hinton. Bride-to-be Tammy Lee Hinton was arrested during her wedding ceremony on July the 17th of 2011. The 53-year-old, who had an active warrant out for her arrest, was believed to be living in Florida, though her whereabouts remained unknown for 3 years. After police received a tip informing them she would be getting married in Jackson, Michigan, they decided to take her into custody on 3 charges of felony identity theft in the midst of her ongoing nuptials. Hinton had allegedly purchased both telephone and energy services and had also applied for a credit card in her son's name without his knowledge or permission. Hinton remained behind bars for half an hour while wearing her wedding dress before posting bail. She was arrested again 2 days later after failing to show up for a scheduled court appearance. If found guilty of her charges, she could face up to 5 years in prison and a $25,000 fine. Number 4. Maya Pugh. Tennessee woman Maya Pugh spent her wedding day behind bars after biting a Memphis police officer On August the 27th of 2021, police were called to the wedding reception after several guests, as well as the bride herself, sparked up a drunken brawl. Officers came across a visibly intoxicated Pugh as she was yelling at her guests for ruining her wedding. She attempted to flee the scene when law enforcement tried breaking up the fights. One of the policemen attempted to grab her, but Pugh resisted, biting him on the right shoulder and struggling to break free. The bride was eventually subdued and taken into custody. She was charged with aggravated assault, public intoxication, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. Number 3. Amber Young. Arizona bride Amber Young caused a 3-car collision while driving to her wedding on March the 12th of 2018. Young, aged 32, was wearing a wedding dress at the time of the accident and was later determined to be heavily intoxicated. Only one of the drivers involved in the crash needed to be taken to the hospital, and they'd only sustained minor injuries. Young was arrested and voluntarily submitted to a blood test before her fiancé arrived to post bail. The video of her arrest was uploaded to social media by the Marana Police Department. It wasn't disclosed whether or not Young managed to attend the ceremony following her release. Number 2. Elizabeth Balog. 33-year-old Elizabeth Balog was arrested by immigration officers on her wedding day after the authorities discovered she'd been paid $400 to marry a stranger in Manchester, England. Balog and her husband-to-be, Asif Hussain, were reported to law enforcement in 2011 when a registrar became suspicious of their behavior. The bride, a naturalized UK citizen born in Hungary, was introduced to her 25-year-old Pakistani fiancé by her cousin, Valerie Farkas, who also acted as an interpreter. Balog and Hussain barely interacted with each other but wished to get married urgently. Following her arrest, Balog initially told officers she truly wanted to marry Hussain, claiming it had been love at first sight. Eventually, though, she admitted they weren't an actual couple and that the scam had been orchestrated by Farkas. All 3 suspects pleaded guilty to conspiracy to facilitate a breach of immigration law. After it emerged that Hussain's student visa had expired and he was looking for a way to remain in the UK, the man was sentenced to a year in prison, while Balog received a lesser sentence of 10 months. For her role in orchestrating the scam, Farkas was ordered to spend 6 months behind bars. Number 1. Kate Elizabeth Pritchard. On July the 31st of 2017, Kate Elizabeth Pritchard aimed a gun at her new husband hours after their wedding in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Police were called to the Clarion Inn where the newlyweds were spending their first night as husband and wife. Employees reportedly witnessed 25-year-old Pritchard pull out a 9mm pistol and pointed at her husband's head. The couple were heavily intoxicated and had been arguing outside a hotel leading up to the incident. Pritchard ended up pulling the trigger while the weapon was aimed at the man's head, but fortunately it wasn't loaded. The woman then loaded the pistol with bullets and fired a shot into the air before police arrived at the scene. She was arrested for aggravated domestic assault while still wearing her wedding gown. Thanks for watching. For a month, would you rather be with your crush but fight daily, or date your best friend's mom or dad? Let us know in the comments section below.